Most of these are regrets based on actions not taken, or it's rather inaction, other than except for the moral one, which is seems
Yeah.
like though that's the one where you did something, but it's something you regret
Yeah,
doing.
that's a great point. I mean, what you see in my research and other research is that regrets of inaction outnumber regrets of action by a pretty wide margin, especially as people get older.
Hmm.
And and sometimes the border is murky between action and inaction. So,
How do
do
you
I
mean?
regret? Well, you can say, do I regret? If you regret spending too much, that's an action, but it's really an inaction because you weren't saving. Um, again, I don't want to get overly complex here, but you're right. You're absolutely right, John. It's inactions outnumber actions by a wide margin.
Well, again, so Daniel, congrats on the book launch. Really excited to have you on here. Maybe, obviously you've written so many different books, but this one is around regret, which is not really something that I've heard a lot of people talk about, particularly at the scale that you have. Maybe a good place to start is to define regret for people and really compare how that compares to some of the other emotions we feel like disappointment.
Okay, good question. So first of all, regret is an emotion, as you say, Sean. It's a negative emotion. It's an aversive emotion. It's an emotion that makes us feel bad, not like joy that makes us feel good. Regret makes us feel bad, and it requires a great deal of cognitive dexterity. Because if you think about what regret is we look backward and we say, if only I hadn't made that decision, or if I had made that decision, if I hadn't taken that action, I had made that action, things would be a lot better today. So it involves time travel. It involves retelling the stories of our life. It involves coming back to the present. So it's actually pretty cognitively sophisticated. But the gist of it is that it is an emotion that makes us feel bad when we look back on our past and wish we had done things differently. Now, on the question of disappointments, good question. Regret is not disappointment. And the big difference between regret and disappointment is agency. Regret is your fault. A good example of that comes from Janet Landman, formerly of the University of Michigan, who says that she tells a story of a 6-year-old girl who loses a tooth. She takes her tooth at night, puts it under her pillow, waiting for the tooth fairy to come. The next morning, she pulls back her pillow. The tooth is still there. She's disappointed, but her parents regret not replacing the tooth with a dollar bill because the parents had volition, the parents had the agency there. Or another one would be, let's say it's not raining today here in Washington, D.C. where I am, but if it were raining, I could say something. I couldn't regret that it's raining. I don't have any control over that. But I could regret that if I looked at the weather forecast, knew it was going to rain, and didn't bring an umbrella, that's on me.
Mm. Right. Got it. Got it. So it's your own responsibility,
Right.
which is probably even harder, right? Because it's out of your control. So it's something you could have done, but you decided
That's
not
why it's
to.
painful.
Right.
It's
Right.
harder to
Yeah.
dismiss.
Yeah. And at the same time, it seems like the Western culture that we live in today comes from really promoting this idea of like not having regrets in
Oh,
life. It's
yeah.
almost, and I don't know if it's an American. I grew up in Korea for kind of like for 7, 8 years, and even with Korean parents, and doesn't seem like it's as present there. There's something around like this relationship between almost like Epicurean and kind of this YOLO culture that has been fostered in pop culture that doesn't try to promote like talking about regrets and living a regretless life. What are your thoughts around that? And
I think that some of it is American, but it is seeped into the rest of the world. That what we have is we have this belief that we should be positive all the time, that we should never look back, that regret is something that makes us weak, and those are fundamentally wrong. They're not wrong philosophically. They're not wrong morally. They're wrong as a matter of science. We have 50 years of science telling us that regret is one of the most common emotions that people experience, that everybody has regrets. If you don't have regrets, it probably means that you're a little kid, you have a brain disorder, or you're a sociopath. Otherwise, you certainly have regrets. And that if we treat them right, regrets can make us better. And yet somehow we've been sold this bill of goods saying that negative emotions are inherently dangerous. Negative emotions should be ignored, batted away, disregarded. And particularly this emotion of regret is dangerous. And so we sort of proclaim courage by saying, I never look backward. I don't have any regrets. And that's fake. It's fake courage, and it's prevalent though, as you say. I got people in the book, as you know, who have no regrets tattoos. That's a pretty strong commitment to a belief system to print it permanently on your body.
Yeah, I mean, it is a painful thought to go back towards that combination of something that you could have controlled. And a lot of these things, I mean, sometimes regrets are some events that you can't change back, right? Some maybe it's someone that you forgot to say goodbye to and they passed away. And
right.
That's really one of the most powerful parts is that you can't undo those regrets.
There's some regrets you can undo and some regrets you can't undo, but that's right. So there's certain. So let's say that you wanted to reach out. I have somebody who I write about who wanted to reach out to a friend who was suffering from cancer. She put it off. She put it off. She put it off. When she finally called, her friend had died earlier that morning. All right. So that's bad, and that door has closed. So you can't do anything about that particular regret, but you can derive a lesson from it for your future behavior, and that's the key. Mm-hmm. Now there are other kinds of regrets. I have a lot of people who regret bullying kids in school. Several of them have gone back to the people they bullied and apologized and asked for forgiveness. And so so some regrets you can undo, others you can. But every kind of regret, whether it's one you can undo or whether you can undo, you can extract a lesson from to guide your future behavior.
Got it. I mean, is the idea of confronting our regrets kind of similar to what Carl Jung talks about in terms of shadow work, where like if you don't embrace the entirety of your being, like it's hard to live that fulfilling full life because you're running away from your shadows. It's kind of embracing that dark side that people are so afraid to embrace, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think there's an even more. I think there's a sort of a more stark way to put it, which is that negative emotions, including our most common negative emotion, regret, it exists for a reason. It confers an evolutionary advantage. I don't think we need to go as far as the Jungian shadow self theory. I think we can bring in, someone who came in a little bit before Jung, which is, several decades before Jung, which is Charles Darwin. I mean, negative emotions are adaptive. Why do we have fear? Because the people who couldn't experience fear died and didn't pass their genes on into the population. I mean, imagine if you were a person who could not experience any kind of fear, or I don't mean you, Sean, but let's say I were a person who could never experience fear. Oh, let me cross the street against traffic. I don't have any fear about that. Okay, you're a dead man. All right. Think about something like grief. Why do human beings grieve? Imagine if you could wave a magic wand and extinguish the feeling of grief from humankind. I think that's a colossally bad idea, because the reason we grieve is because we love. And so, my father just died. Oh, who cares? Doesn't matter. I don't experience grief. That's terrible, And so we don't want to live that way. And so negative emotions are adaptive, including our most common negative emotion, regret. I think that's a simpler explanation of it.
Yeah. Well, was that
I'm not saying that Jung is necessarily wrong. I think it's an interesting analysis you're making. What I'm saying is that we can have a much more parsimonious explanation by even forgetting about Jung and just sticking with evolution.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. Seems more first principles for sure.
Yeah.
In terms of, I guess, what was the origin of writing about regret? I mean, you've written about timing, you've written about motivation. What was like kind of the premise of writing about regret? Was this something that you personally dealt with?
Yeah.
That you've healed, and was the origin?
Well, I don't know if I healed, but I mean, it was something that I was dealing with, something that I was turning over in my head, and that I found when I talked to other people about it was much more compelling to them than I would have expected.
Mm.
And it's also, I think it's also partly a time of life thing that I think I sort of spend more time reckoning with my regrets now at my age than I did, say, 25 years ago, where I didn't have as much mileage on me, I didn't have as much experience, and yet I also have, at least I hope, plenty of mileage ahead of me. And so I want to know how to use what happened in the past to guide what I'm going to be able to do in the future.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Hmm. Yeah. The other thing with the regret that I found is if you don't embrace it, there's either subconsciously or unconsciously, it brings out a lot of the bad emotions in you, which is envy, jealousy that you see in other people. So let's say
Oh,
you didn't
interesting. Yeah.
start a business and you purposely decided not to. So that's a regret because you could have done it. You could have left that job that was stable and gone out to venture into your own startup. And now you see close friends of yours or other people that have succeeded or are in the process of pursuing. And instead of feeling happy for them, you're not only just hurting yourself, but you're also hurting other relationships of people around you because they're embracing or they're shining that light that you could have been, right? So you kind of
Right.
almost want to run away from that potential that you could have achieved. Is there some form of that, at least with regret as well? It's not just
Could
about you,
be.
but yeah.
Could be. I mean, I think there's comparative aspects of everything, and we can go back to Darwin again and talk about envy. I mean, why does envy exist? I mean, envy can be destructive, but envy also is revealing. If you feel envy, you have to say if one feels envy towards somebody else's situation, it's a signal of maybe what you care about,
Hmm.
and it could be a positive or a negative symbol of what you care about, and so. Um, um, envy is a less functional emotion, but it's not devoid of function at all. It has some use to it. But I think you make an interesting point. I mean, what we do when we regret is we compare what our current state to what we could have been, and one way we evaluate what could have been is by looking at our peers and other people around us.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that really caught my eyes is the survey that you've done of people around the world, 15,000 people, 105 countries, really talking about the four core regrets. Can we just go over this real quick
Sure.
and go through these?
Sure, and we're now that survey is still up. It's worldregretsurvey.com. We're over 19,000 now in 109 countries. It's unbelievable. And what I found
Amazing.
is around the world, people ended up having the same four core regrets. So one was foundation regrets, which are if only I'd done the work. These are people who regret smoking, people who regret not saving money, people who regret bad health choices, not working hard enough in school, small choices, decisions early that accumulate into negative consequences later on. Second category are boldness regrets. Boldness regrets are if only I'd taken the chance. These are people who regret not asking someone out on a date, not traveling, not speaking up, not asserting oneself, not starting a business, as you were saying before. Third category are moral regrets. These are if only I'd done the right thing. These are people who regret bullying other people, people who regret infidelity. Fourth category is connection regrets, which are about relationships that have come apart, usually in slow, undramatic ways. People want to reach out, they don't reach out, and sometimes, as you were saying before, it's too late. And that's connection regrets are if only I'd reached out. And so around the world, with remarkable consistency, these are the things that people regret.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things that, at least maybe just by the examples that you brought up, is that most of these are regrets based on actions not taken, or it's rather inaction, other than except for the moral one, which is seems like
Yeah.
though that's the one where you did something, but it's something you regret
Yeah,
doing.
that's a great point. I mean, what you see in my research and other research is that regrets of inaction outnumber regrets of action by a pretty wide margin, especially as people get older.
Hmm.
And and sometimes the border is murky between action and inaction. So
How do
do
you
I
mean?
regret? Well, you can say, do I regret? If you regret spending too much, that's an action, but it's really an inaction because you weren't saving. Um, again, I don't want to get overly complex here, but you're right. You're absolutely right, Sean. It's inactions outnumber actions by a wide margin, and moral regrets tend to be many more actions than inactions. Whereas boldness regrets are almost always inactions, Connection regrets are often inactions. Foundation regrets are, I would say, mostly inactions, a few actions.
Yeah. Well, to kind of go back on that point around action, would an action be generally the positive goal that you're trying to head towards? So most people would, I'm assuming most people would want to have more money versus not have money. So the action that they should have taken is either investing or saving.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah. I mean, again. I mean, typically what it is that people have an action regret would be I bullied somebody 10 years ago, and I regret doing that. Um,
Right.
um, I um, I in I spent money on a piece of clothing that I only wore once and no longer care about. All right, and inaction regret is, oh, there was somebody I was really interested in 10 years ago and I never asked him or her out on a date. That's an
Mm.
inaction. I wanted to start a business, but I was too chicken to do it. That's an inaction. I wanted to reach out to my old friend, and then when he was sick, but I waited and waited and waited, and then it was too late. That's an inaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we go into kind of digging deeper into the personal regrets and how to process that for people, what are some of the, I guess I'm curious to know, like, do regrets differ for people that are close to the end of their lives versus those who are still young meaning probably
Well, I mean,
20 to
there's the
40?
age effect is action versus inaction. I mean, I'm skeptical about end of life regrets. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever systematically collected them. And if if the first time you're reckoning with your regrets are in the final hours of your life, they're not going to be that useful to you. So I'd
Hmm.
rather have people, I'd rather have people confront them earlier.
Yeah, there's something about, I mean, I've seen a bunch of viral videos go around. There's something that people are curious around where they want advice from people that are at the final days,
Yeah, no, that
months,
makes perfect sense.
years of
Yeah.
their lives. Yeah, but I guess from a practical perspective, utility perspective, it is kind of useless. So you're trying to get people to face this earlier on as
Yeah,
much as
absolutely,
possible.
absolutely, absolutely. And believe me, I mean, here's the thing: people who are dying are not the only people with regrets. Everybody has regrets, and we can learn from everybody's regrets, not just that tiny sliver of people who are drawing their last breaths.
Yeah. What are some of the patterns you've seen from the 19,000 people? Is there a certain, no matter what country, no matter what gender, no matter what social class that they may be in, is there certain things that have come up over and over again?
Well, I mean, these are the four core regrets are the ones that come up over and over again.
Mhm.
And there's very little national difference, to my surprise.
Interesting.
There's very little national difference. And I also did another piece of research, a quantitative survey, public opinion poll in the U.S. population, where we sampled enough people so that we could weight the sample to, see what kind of demographic differences there were based on gender and race and so forth. And they were very small.
Yeah. Another thing that I'm curious about is, do certain regrets affect us differently if there are certain things under our control that we could still remedy versus those opportunities that are gone and something that we can't face moving
Um,
forward?
Yeah, I mean, because again, like that's the difference between an open door regret and a closed door regret. Like if let's say that we wanted to reach out to a friend and that friend died.
Yeah.
That door is closed. All you can do, you can't do anything about that. That's going to hurt a lot, and all you can do then is extract a lesson from that regret to go forward. If you have a friend who you haven't reached out to, and that person's still alive, reach out now. You can do something about it and extinguish that regret.
Yeah, I guess there's something about that time has passed by and there's something that's out of your control that almost, for me at least, would make it feel a little bit easier because it's just something that's outside of your
What do you mean?
control.
Give me an example.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where the common saying is like, oh, like, I guess it was meant to be, right? So maybe an
Mm.
opportunity passes by, a job opportunity is no longer open,
Uh
and
huh.
you process it in your mind, maybe out of protection of not hurting yourself, to just say, you know what,
I see
let's
what
just
you're
move
saying.
on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that can be a form of rationalization, which is not always a bad thing. But I mean, you can also do it too much, where it becomes a delusion,
Yeah.
a negative delusion. The other thing that people will do sometimes is they will take some of the sting out of a regret by offering a different form of counterfactual thinking than regret. Regret is an upward counterfactual. You imagine how things could have been better. You can also do a downward counterfactual, imagine how things could have turned out worse. That's an at least. The upward is an if only, downward is an at least. And you can say, I have people in this database who say, a lot of them who say, mostly women who say, I shouldn't have married that idiot, but at least I have these two great kids. And so that's a way to take some of the sting out of it. It doesn't say that you can't still learn from that, but it's a way to make it feel a little less bad.
Yeah, yeah. Um, have there been people that you've gone through or just spoken with that have had difficulties trying to spark or present their regrets on the surface because maybe they've hidden it for so long, or maybe there are people that have gone through life without regrets because they truly believe that everything happens for a reason and so forth. For those people, knowing that we can use regret for a positive force, what are some of the questions or processes that they should ask themselves to kind of surface these regrets that they may have had throughout their lives?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I found people actually not struggling too much with that. In fact, almost in a comical way, where like in the World Regret Survey, when I ask people their regrets, I would have people fill it out saying, "I don't have any regrets, but 10 years ago, I stole money from the church plate, and I really feel bad about doing that, but I don't have any regrets."
So they don't title it as regret. It's like
Exactly,
just,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. They
I see.
describe it, but don't use the R word. So you
The
have,
artwork,
so,
yeah.
so, so you have, excuse me. So you have some of that. Um, I think a starting point is just to begin very small, and so to ask yourself, you know, um, write down one instance where you look back on your life and wish you had done something differently, and that's it. And just start. I don't suggest that people begin by saying, okay, list your 12 biggest regrets. I just say, like, tell me about one time where you look back on your life and wish you had done something differently.
Yeah, yeah. So now that hopefully people have identified some of the regrets that they have, I mean, what are some of the research or things that have sparked you to make people go deeper into going around their regrets and remembering their regrets? Like, what are some of the positive benefits from that?
Well, I mean, what it does is if we reckon with our regrets, if we confront them rather than ignore them or wallow in them, there's a whole array of benefits. It can help us become better negotiators, help us avoid cognitive biases, help us become better problem solvers, help us become better strategists, better parents, find more meaning in life. The trouble is that we haven't given people very good instruction on how to deal with their regrets, so most of them are left floundering.
Right, right. So how do people, now that they have identified the regrets, what are some of the processes that they can go through?
Well, I tend to look at it in three stages: inward, outward, forward. Inward, outward, forward. So inward is you have to reframe how you look at the regret and yourself. So you can, instead of lacerating yourself, you can treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Recognize that your regrets are part of the human condition. So that's a good first step. A lot of times we're too tough on ourselves. We talk to ourselves in ways that are really just brutal. So don't do that. Treat yourself with what's called self-compassion. Second step, outward, is as we were talking about, sort or hinting at least before. There's a strong case to be made for disclosing your regret. That's a great unburdening for people. It actually can build affinity with other people, believe it or not, because people think more of you when you disclose your vulnerabilities. The other thing about disclosure is that when we convert our regrets into language, that makes them less menacing. Just like naming an emotion makes it less menacing. Describing what's going on actually converts this blobby amorphous emotion into concrete words, which are less fearsome. And then finally is you want to extract a lesson from it. And the way to do that is you need to get some distance from it. You want to self-distance. And so you can do that by talking to yourself in the third person, by imagining what your, if you're in a business setting, what your successor would do, by asking yourself, what would you tell your best friend to do?
Yeah, that third person speech is very useful for sure. Because I think
Yeah.
so many people are in their own heads and
Yeah. It's a
in
little
their own
weird, but it's
trenches.
useful. Yeah.
how would you like, how do you go about it for yourself? Like what would be like an example of how you would talk to yourself in third person around that?
Oh, I mean, I mean, sometimes not so much for regret, but in general, like if I'm exercising, instead of saying, I can do this, I say, Dan, let's go, move your legs faster. Dan, kick a
Mm.
little harder. Dan, you've done this before, you can make it to the end of this race.
Got it. Got it. And I guess even advice, like if you're at a pivotal point of what decision you should make around certain things around your career, instead of looking at it from that first point of view, it's like look at it from if someone was to be your advisor or your
Exactly.
mentor.
I mean, just on that case and that situation, ask yourself, what would I tell my best friend to do? The single best decision making tool that I know. Ask yourself,
Mm.
what would I tell my best friend to do? When people come to me with problems, they say, "Oh, I don't know what to do. I'm trying to make this choice. I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know what I should do. I'm so stuck." I say, "Well, what would you tell your best friend to do?" And they say, "Oh, I tell her to do." And I'm like, "Okay, I think you've answered the question."
Right. 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 You also mentioned self-compassion. That's something that I currently struggle with, and it's partly just because of the way I was raised with very, Tiger Asian parents, where they're super strict and disciplined around what I should do, what I should not do. And there are benefits around that. I feel like it's been attributed around like conscientiousness and getting discipline, even if it doesn't feel good. Kind of the results have shown to kind of flywheel that experience. I mean, what have you learned about self-compassion through research, and is there any faults to thinking that just being super hard on yourself is going to produce better results?
Well, I mean, what's wrong with it is that self criticism feels virtuous, but there's little evidence that it's effective. Very little evidence that it's effective. At the same point, I think some cultures are over-indexed on self-esteem. There's some evidence that that can be slightly effective, but it's way overrated. And here's the thing on self-compassion: the reason to choose self-compassion over self-criticism is not because it's nicer, but because it's more effective. So I don't buy for a moment that self-compassion is incompatible with conscientiousness. I don't think self-compassion is incompatible with discipline. I think it's a kind of a discipline. I think at some level self-criticism is lazy because it's so easy to do. I think self-compassion requires greater discipline, requires greater focus, requires more supple and complex kind of thinking. And I think that self-compassion is, and there's 20 years of research on this. Self-compassion does not foster complacency. It does not foster lack of conscientiousness. It does not erode discipline. On the contrary.
And maybe there's like this fine line. Like if you were to define self-compassion or even provide an example, like what would that look like? Because I'm looking at
Treat,
the person that
yeah.
is complacent, where they could run extra miles or they could go to the gym, but they are saying, no, I love my body. This is how, I was born. This is what I'm supposed to feel like. I don't want to go to the gym because, I'm just super comfortable with my body. So they're not pushing themselves or having the higher standard. Whereas if I were thinking about myself, there's a little bit of dark side there for sure, but it helps me get to the gym, helps me get results. Like, what is that fine line?
Well, I mean, I think that you can. I think that self-compassion can help you get to your gym. So, are you treating yourself with the proper kindness by not pushing yourself? Are you treating yourself with enough kindness by not allowing yourself to be your very best? That self-compassion isn't an excuse for inaction or complacency. It's basically treating yourself with the same kindness that you would treat somebody else. And so, I would encourage other people to be conscientious because I think it's the right thing to do, and I think that itself is kind. So I should treat so self-compassion is not an excuse for letting yourself off the hook. It's a way to treat yourself with the same care and generosity that you would treat somebody else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could see it particularly being useful if you were ever in a pattern of hitting all of your goals and you've got that momentum. A lot of the times when someone gets off the track, they leverage self-hatred, which is kind of comes natural to them, and
Mm-hmm.
they go deeper into this negative hole, like, oh man, like you suck, this is like, you're not living to your potential, and then that leads you to do less things and you go into this negative spiral, whereas I guess self-compassion is the benefit of that is like, what, this happens to everyone, like
I mean, I
get
would
back on
encourage
track.
you and your listeners, like, just Google go to Kristen Neff's, or go to, there's a page, there are a couple pages in my book where I write about some of the research on this. It's pretty impressive what the benefits of self compassion. And again, it might be suffering from a branding problem because it sounds a little gooey. And I think some of us would like something that sounds a little bit more hard headed. But the idea of treating yourself with the same kindness and generosity you would treat somebody else, the idea that recognizing that your missteps are part of the human experience, the idea of not taking mistakes as the full definition of your life, but as part of your life, is psychologically healthy and, in my mind, absolutely compatible with conscientiousness and discipline.
Got it. Got it. Speaking about like habit building and building systems, I think I mean, what you're mentioning around turning regrets from what has some form of negative connotation to something that could be a positive force for helping us reduce future, problems in our lives is very powerful. But I guess I don't want someone to make this as a one-time event and set it and forget it, meaning they write down some of the goals or regrets they may have had
Yeah.
this year. How can we, because obviously it's human nature for us to have regrets in the future, probably regrets today, tomorrow. So how do we create a system or process for people to be able to go through this on a regular basis so that it becomes part of their lifestyle habits? Is this something you
Yeah.
do weekly, monthly?
I don't think you should do it weekly. I don't. I think that I'm a big believer in. I'm a big believer in starting small. So think about one regret that you have and write about it for 3 consecutive days for 15 minutes. That's a great way to make. That's a great way to make sense of it. And then write down what you learned from that regret and what you're going to do next time, and make a public commitment to that. Post it on social media, tell one of your friends. I think that's the simplest thing to do. And then if that works well, maybe try it again the following month. That's one thing. Another thing that I like, another tool that I like, is the failure resume, where you list you basically do an inverse resume. Instead of listing all your accomplishments, you list all your screw ups and your failures and your flubs. You put that in one column. In the next column, you list what lesson did you learn from it. And in the third column, you list what you're going to do next time. I think that's a really helpful practice to do, once a year. You can also do, I like this practice too, of regret circles, where you gather with, say, 4 or 5 other people, and each person shares one regret. Again, just start with one. Then talks about what lesson he or she has learned from it. But then you do the self-distancing, and the other 4 or 5 people say, okay, here's what I think you should do next. And you have to listen to that advice. And so that's a way to normalize these regrets. It's a way to draw lessons from. So there are all kinds of small practices that people can do
Yeah.
to learn from these things.
I have a feeling that if someone is around other people, even if they trust them, it might present different types of regrets that they're comfortable sharing versus what they
Could
would
be.
share in their journal. So I guess what is like a minimum benchmark? I don't know if that's the right way to frame it, but like, how do we avoid people going through pity? Let's say, oh, I regret not going to this event, which isn't really super useful. Like, what
Yeah.
is the benchmark of what a regret should be such that we can actually leverage that information?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think that you're right that we're in public, that some of the regrets could be performative in the way that, but I think if you get the right people, it shouldn't be that way. That it shouldn't be performative. I mean, it's sort of performative in the way that job interviews are, in the sense that you're like, oh, what's your biggest weakness? Oh, I work too hard and I care too much, and so it becomes kind of a joke. I don't know if there is I don't know if there is a benchmark. I think that the way to recognize a regret in some ways is by looking at its endurance. So there probably are mistakes that I've made last week that I no longer remember, but there are things that I've screwed up 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago that still bug me. That's telling me something. That
That's interesting.
those kinds of regrets are telling me what I value, and they're instructing me to on what to do differently.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's kind of like when you're going through ideas, we all have so many different ideas, but the ones that, at least the framework that I've found useful, is if it comes up 3 times over the next year or two, like that's probably something that you really want to
Yeah,
stick
I think that's a good.
towards.
I think that's interesting. I think that's a totally useful. It's a totally useful tool. There are things, I think that successful living is thinking is certain stuff fades away, and that's cool. But the stuff that keeps bubbling up, you got to pay attention to.
Got it. Got it. Well, Daniel, I'm curious, as this last question, you've studied human behavior for decades at this point. How would you sum up what all humans need to live a fulfilling life?
um,
Yeah, I'm just gonna end with a banger there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think what people need is essentially um, purpose, and they need a sense of purpose. They need to know that they're doing something for a reason, and they need to be around people who they love and who love them. They need to have a life filled with people who they love and who love them.
Just like that.
Yeah,
And
I don't think
no
it's I don't
regrets.
there's some nuance beneath that, but ultimately that's it.
Yeah, at a high level. Keeps it simple.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, where can people find you online? Obviously, you've got multiple books, but the latest one is Power of Regret, How Looking Backwards Moves Us Forward. You've also got the book When and Drive. Yeah,
You can just go to my website, which is danpink.com, danpink.com.
beautiful. All right, Dan, thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll have all of the links below. Check it out. Thanks again, Dan.
Thank you, Sean.